Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, in the past week, Bernie Sanders has been attacked by Biden, Hillary Clinton, and Elizabeth Warren. He's either outright apologized, stayed silent, or declined to respond in all three cases, revealing what I think is a fundamental hypocrisy of his campaign and a deeper criticism of the progressive left. Simply, they don't really seem to want to win, and more importantly, it reveals that a lot of their talk, it's really just talk. Let's take Joe Biden's case. As we covered on the show yesterday, Bernie Sanders surrogate Zephyr Teachout puts out a very good op-ed detailing Biden's history of corruption. The media and the campaign freak out, intimating that it was undemocratic to do that the day before Trump's impeachment trial began in the Senate. Bernie threw his own people under the bus, telling CBS News he in no way believes that Biden is corrupt. How did the Biden campaign repay Bernie? Let's take a listen.
As Democrats, we can't launch dishonest attacks against fellow Democrats. We have to beat Donald Trump. Now Bernie's campaign has unleashed a barrage of negative attacks on Joe Biden. They've even accused Joe Biden of supporting Paul Ryan's cuts to Social Security. Bernie's campaign is not telling the truth.
In other words, Biden has no compunction crying foul, smacking Sanders because he's a politician that actually wants to win. Sanders does not appear to know what that looks like. He's basically had the same reaction after Elizabeth Warren's campaign smeared him as a sexist publicly. He claimed it wasn't true, declined to call Warren a liar to her face on the debate stage. He made out fine because the general public saw right through Warren's tactics, but he didn't prosecute the way that he should have. And importantly, throughout that debate, he barely landed a scratch on Biden. Then Hillary Clinton enters the fray, despite nobody asking for it, as we covered yesterday. She said of Sanders that, quote, nobody likes him, lectured him about his supporters online, fully put forth the bitterness and the entitlement that cost her the White House in 2016. How did Sanders reply? Well, his campaign said, quote, my focus today is on a monumental moment in American history, the impeachment of Donald Trump. Together, we are going to go forward and defeat the most dangerous president in American history. He apparently later made a joke about his wife at the very least likes him when talking to reporters on Capitol Hill. But Hillary and Joe Biden, at least, are two politicians who embody what Sanders claims he has been fighting against for his entire career. And yet, he is completely incapable of seizing a moment or in calling out the obvious corruption of both of them. He bows to the liberal Democratic establishment that tells him, and him alone, that he must pledge allegiance to them and not the other way around. And the utter weakness comes from a guy who claims that his theory of political change is to go around putting public pressure on members of his own party to pass legislation. Why should we believe him? He cannot even call out corruption to Joe Biden's face in an election that he daily says on the campaign trail is existential for so many workers in the country. I've said it here before. It all seems to confirm my real suspicion about Sanders. His constitutional inability to actually fight the bad actors in his own party, it demonstrates that he's going to bow to them when he is president. And if he bows to them, then the economic populist message that so many people flock to him for will not have that much success. And instead, what you're going to see is an open border and a bunch of other left-wing executive orders. And the way I look at it, Crystal, with this is that he was completely unable to rise to the occasion in all three moments. I should note, we're going to put it out later, he did put out a negative campaign ad on Social Security.
Hitting Biden back.
He's willing to do policy and substance, and that's okay. But, you know, whenever somebody's corrupt, you should be able to go out there and say he's corrupt. And what's fantastic, Joe Biden was on Morning Joe literally this morning, and they kept asking about the Social Security attack, and he says, well, Bernie's apologized to me. Bernie's apologized to me. That's not what he apologized to you for.
Right.
You're basically handing your opponent the greatest defense that you could ever ask for, and at the same time, his campaign is blanketing the airwaves with negative ads about you. You cannot apologize, especially if you didn't do anything wrong, because they don't care. That's not what this is all about. They're not like, oh my gosh, you called me corrupt. They're upset because somebody's finally telling the truth about them. And when you bow down on that, it just tells me quite a bit. Like I said about it, if that's your theory of political change, you got to act like it.
That apology was very disappointing because there was nothing wrong with, first of all, it was an op-ed that Zephyr Teachout put out. It didn't even come directly from the campaign. It was factually based. It was important. It's certainly going to be used that times 10 if Joe Biden were the nominee by the Trump campaign, et cetera. So these are things that we should have out now. In the macro, I think you are right. It is concerning of, okay, if you are the president, how are you going to govern? Are you actually going to go into these districts? Are you actually going to run candidates against intransigent Democrats and force their hand and all those things, which he did in Burlington? I mean, his track record says, yes, I will, but it's moments like this do cause you to question that. However, I will say, mostly because of the stupid strategic decisions of his opponents, I think this has all worked out for him. Because
yes,
he
but
is
not
now,
in spite of himself.
That's right. That doesn't mean that it was the right decision, but in spite of himself, it has worked out for him because he appears above the fray, right? People saw through that Elizabeth Warren thing, and when she refused to shake his hand and he was cordial to her, that made him look good, right? With Joe Biden, that he would apologize, and then Biden right away turns around and hits him with a negative ad. Well, not only does that make Joe Biden look bad and petty and nasty, it also completely opens the floor for Bernie to put out the ad hitting back on Social Security, which, by the way, the fact that this is so sensitive to Joe tells you something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their polls show that this issue is a trouble spot for him, especially with his base of older and disproportionately African-American voters who really care a lot about Social Security. And Hillary Clinton, are you kidding me? You couldn't ask for anything better than Hillary Clinton to come after you. Just ask Tulsi Gabbard. It's the greatest thing for his campaign
but
possible.
That's the thing. He does not have the ability to rise to that occasion. I mean, he does not.
I disagree with you on that. I actually thought his response was the right one because her thing was so petty. Nobody likes him. I mean, it's so nasty, like junior high mean girls stuff, that for him to be the statesman saying we've got bigger things at hand, it both makes him look, it elevates him. It also is a little bit tongue in cheek because her team and her people are always the ones that are saying, like, we have to be unified, we have to come together to beat Donald Trump. So he's kind of throwing that back in their face. I actually thought that was the right play on that
but
one.
see, that's the thing is, what it shows is his default is to just let it go. And you can't actually do his default is to let it go and to get along, to go along. And that is just so counter to his entire theory of what he says he's going to do. So I look at this and I'm like, okay, how would he actually be as president? He's going to give in to quite a bit of this stuff. And that is what is ultimately going to come, and it's really going to undercut so much of what he actually runs on as this like movement guy. Whenever it comes down to it, whenever he fights with the establishment generally is winning in all of these things.
So the counter is number one, I mean, this is part of why his favorability ratings are so high and people like him so much, because his default is to kind of be above the fray and not engage in the tit for tat. And on the issues, you have to say, this guy's been in the House and in the Senate for a long time, and he has stood apart from the Democratic Party, taken unpopular stances on everything from marriage equality to trade deals to war and peace. All of that, he has stood apart from the party and called out his own people. So that gives you hope. On the other hand, I agree with you. I would like to see a little more toughness, a little more killer instinct in these moments. I think luckily for him, because of his opponents misplaying this, it has worked out for him, and that's what the polls are showing today.
Can't count on that forever, though, Bernie.
Next on Rising, Congressman Jody Hice shares his thoughts on what's happened in the impeachment trial so far. That is up next.